Hello, and welcome back to Sacred Wellness, a space where we explore healing, embodiment, awakening, and what it truly means to come home to yourself, especially in seasons where everything begins to shift for you. Today's conversation is deeply powerful and deeply needed because today we are talking about midlife, not just as an ending, but as an awakening. A time where many women begin to feel changes in their body, changes they may or may not understand, changes in their energy, and changes in their desires. And instead of seeing it as something we need to fix, what if it's something we need to listen to? What if our bodies can talk to us and they can give us the guidance that we need to go through different changes in our life? That's exactly what we're talking about today as I'm joined by Carla Wainwright, who is a holistic wellness coach, sexual awakening facilitator, and midlife alchemist. She supports women in their 40s and above in reclaiming their vitality, balancing their hormones, and reconnecting with their pleasure and power through a beautiful blend of metabolic health, nervous system healing, and sensual embodiment. Carla, I'm honored to have you here today. Welcome to Sacred Wellness.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here.
Me too. There's so much to discuss. I want to jump right in, but I want to begin with talking about midlife as sort of an awakening, not a decline. So let's begin there. So many women are really taught to fear this midlife phase that we start to go through. And they see it as something sort of being taken away from them. And me, myself, I am in this phase right now. And so a lot of the work that I do and a lot of the topics I discuss on sacred wellness is exactly that. So I want to talk a little bit about today about how our body is speaking to us. Can you talk a little bit about what it is the body is really communicating to us during this time that we're going through this?
I'd love to. So you're absolutely right. Many women, I would probably say most women, um, have really been conditioned through culture to think that this is a time of decline, that our best years are behind us, and to really fear aging. I mean, there's a massive multi-billion-dollar industry that really speaks to all of that and can create a lot of insecurities. And so it's no wonder that as a woman starts to move through her perimenopausal journey and her body's beginning to change and her just everything about her is beginning to change, that can cause a lot of instability and
Yes.
can cause a lot of women to just, yeah, not feel confident anymore. And so, you asked me the question, like what is happening in the body, and I actually see it as an incredible transformation, as a portal into the most powerful time of a woman's life. That isn't to say it's easy, and most transformations aren't actually easy. And so, from the physiological side, of course, our hormones are beginning to shift. Those key sex hormones are well, at the beginning, they're kind of all over the place, but then they, of course, start to decline. And that creates some really real physiological changes in the body. So, we can experience uncomfortable things like hot flashes. We can have weight gain. Our minds start to shift and change because there's a massive, massive neurochemical shift that's happening. It's as big as the neurochemical shift that happened in puberty. But that can also be really destabilizing because often we get brain fog or we feel like we can't think as clearly. So there's all of these things that are happening. And as I said, transformations are not always easy, but it is really in many ways, I see it as like the journey of the butterfly. And so the caterpillar is moving into this chrysalis, and the chrysalis is the darkness, and it's kind of navigating all of these changes and different ways of being in the world. And what happens in that is there's a real dissolving of our old identity, and
Mm,
then we move through to the other side where we break out of that and we really come and merge into that butterfly form, into this really powerful and potent version of ourselves. But I think that there's a couple of things that need to happen in order for women to fully be able to do that. And one is to understand that the changes that are happening are really very powerful, very potent, and to get the support you need so you can navigate those with as much ease as possible, and to really reframe that into this idea of coming into a place of potency, of power, of wisdom, of eldership. You know, the Chinese have this beautiful saying, comes from the Taoist tradition of moving into the second spring.
Mm.
And it is this time where our sexual energy, instead of losing that through menstruation or creating a baby, gets channeled up into the heart, and it is really available to us to create and empower ourselves to the most creative way possible. So, yeah, so much in there, but that's basically, the gist of what I really believe is that we're stepping into that really, really beautiful and powerful phase of our lives.
Yeah, I love that explanation. Thank you. Yeah, when we think about, going through menopause or perimenopause, we think a lot because a lot of what's going on is within our body. But also, I want to touch upon a little what you said about mentally and the emotional overwhelm and sort of letting go of those old identities that we had. We need to begin to shift out of them. And that can be really scary for a lot of women who identified as somebody for so long. They played this role. And now things are changing and they're moving into this new phase and they're questioning, who am I? What have I done with my life? I went through that when my teenagers were, getting older and I identified as a mom for so long. And then all of a sudden now it was like, well, who am I really? And that was really the beginning of my transformation years ago. I wasn't going through menopause at the time, but it's just another, example of how women go through and they shift through these changes, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and physically. And the emotional overwhelm, I think, can be a lot for women because we have so much always going on, right? We have our hands in many different pots. Can you talk a little bit about how we can sort of go back and find that space within us to look at those things that may be hard to look at during those times?
Yeah, so the emotional challenge, absolutely, there's so many shifting identities. Often women are in that sandwich generation. They may still have kids at home and they have aging parents, and there's a lot of demands. And then at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, there are all of these neurochemical changes that are happening. And so the way that we relate to others in the world actually really shifts. So one of the big things that happens, which I think is the impetus for women to perhaps question, you know, who am I and what am I, what's next for me, is that people pleasing capacity begins to diminish. And that's, we have that. There's a, biological reason for that. It's very important, especially when we're younger and we've got young kids, and it's a survival mechanism. It comes from, eons of evolution.
Yes.
But it begins to change. And because one of my teachers, Dr. Mindy Pels, talks about like your neurochemical armor, it begins to shift and change. So what we would normally, in terms of our behavior, do, we aren't as drawn to doing that anymore. We're much more willing to perhaps say no. We're much more willing to have different kinds of boundaries and to just not be willing to prioritize everyone first. And then that in itself can be massively uncomfortable because it's like, well, wait a second, why are these relationships maybe having a bit more friction, or why are they looking different, and all of these sorts of things. But I really do feel like in many ways, it is part of this beautiful evolution to giving yourself as a woman the clarity and the space to see your roles in all of your life differently through a different lens, and to begin to prioritize yourself. And that can be uncomfortable because there are a lot of cultural narratives about how women are supposed to behave.
Yes.
And as women get older, and hopefully our confidence begins to increase, we begin to demand more and we begin to stand in our power more. And that can be uncomfortable for others, right? So
Yes.
we have to, again, like transformations are not necessarily comfortable, but those heroines' journeys, what comes through on the other side, if we're willing to step into it and to be curious and to, navigate the shifts and changes that are happening in our relationships, in our bodies, all of those sorts of things, what happens on the other side is this really incredible blossoming, because we actually, in many ways, are able to stand in a place of like of authority and authenticity that wasn't available to us because of all of the different roles that we had to play. So it is
Yeah.
actually very exciting.
It is when you look at it, sometimes the most beautiful um, changes come through a lot of pain and going through these transformations that we have. But definitely, I see a lot of women and they go through this experience. Not only is it difficult for ourselves, and that's why I talk about this so much on this channel, is because it is difficult for others. You've been this way for so long, and now others expect you. Why are you changing? What's different? And so they're also questioning themselves. My husband and I went through this, and it's a big change in a marriage when all of a sudden you were one way and now you're becoming another way and you're like, that's no longer acceptable to me. I need help. Or speaking your voice or just being able to communicate in a way that is loving, but also demanding, right? There's like a fine line between finding what that is for you yourself. But one huge thing that I see across the board with many women that I connect with is that the overlooked part of all of this conversation comes back to pleasure.
Mhm.
And pleasure is so huge. So many of us, because I work with the body a lot, are so disconnected from our own pleasure. We don't even understand really what it is anymore. And so our desires, our pleasure, it all is intertwined. Can you explain a little bit about why pleasure is such a vital part of healing and the awakening?
Absolutely. It's one of my absolute favorite topics. So I'm so glad you brought it up. Pleasure is it is such a powerful way for women to just navigate the world and also really attune into the deep needs of herself. So what's interesting is that women will consistently choose stress over pleasure. Again, this is a biological mechanism. Nature did this so that we would choose safety. However, in a world where we're constantly bombarded by stressful events 24/7 at a magnitude that we've never in our human history have ever had to endure, that constant gravitation towards stress over pleasure has a real consequence, right? So then our cortisol levels are elevated, and then that has a whole negative cascade of downstream effects in terms of our metabolic health, our hormonal health, our thyroid health, all of these sorts of things. But what's interesting, of course, is that the antidote to stress is pleasure. So it's kind of, they're so interconnected. And on the one hand, even though we may gravitate towards stress because that's how we're neurologically hardwired, we have the conscious ability to choose stress as the antidote.
Hmm.
So we have to be very conscious to choose that because it is such a potent way to really regulate our entire nervous system and to help us become clearer to that inner voice of what our true meaning and purpose is and what really lights us up in the world. I have this saying for myself, like, I want to be turned on by life, and that doesn't just mean sexual turn on. It means that I'm really
Yes.
engaged and really connected to all aspects of life around me. And how do I do that? Well, I do that through pleasure. So, pleasure through my senses, pleasure through connection, pleasure through slowing down, being purposeful, and noticing present moments. I will say, like, imperfect because I'm like everybody else. I get caught up in the stress and I get caught up in the distraction and all of that. But I know that the moment I consciously choose pleasure, I can feel it. The dramatic
Mm.
shift that happens physiologically in the body is so incredible. And at the same time, I feel that capacity to actually tap into my inner wisdom, like that body wisdom, which I think as a woman who is moving through midlife and beyond, that is growing and growing and growing our capacity. I mean, we've had all of these years of experience, and so much of that wisdom is just waiting to be tapped into. And pleasure is the way that we can really access that. So whether that is through the breath, whether that is through looking at something beautiful, of having a tender conversation, of touch that's really sensual, any number of things, those are the
Hmm.
ways that we attune into, as I said, those really that deep inner wisdom of the body and support our bodies as we navigate midlife with all of those hormonal changes, all of those physical changes, that we make it so much easier on ourselves, always,
Yes.
always connecting to pleasure.
Yeah, smell is a huge one for me. So
Mhm.
beautiful flowers, I love seeing them. I love smelling them. They absolutely bring pleasure into my life. I love having them in my home. And so anything that you can do around you, but I do think it goes back to what you said earlier about taking that time to slow down. So many of us are disconnected from our outside world. We're really on the social media and we're going, going, going constantly that sometimes slowing down, even in and of itself, can be very uncomfortable. So, going out for a walk by yourself in the morning, I love to do that. That's something that really grounds me for my day and gets my day started. There's a lot of things that you shared that we can do to really connect with what brings us pleasure. And it's unique to everybody, right? There's not one formula that works for you or works for me because we're all so different.
Absolutely. I think what a lot of women miss is that, um, certainly, I guess what I'd want to just preface by saying is pleasure should not be one more thing on your already massive to-do list. In fact, you're experiencing pleasurable moments of all kinds throughout your day, but as you just said, it's about being present. It's about actually noticing them, right? So we're eating multiple times a day. Well, can you actually just really pause and notice the flavors and the texture in your mouth and just really delight in that? We're constantly looking around us. What in your environment right in this moment could you look at that, brings you joy, and just linger on that and the memory of that? Smell, sound, all of these things. I really like, one of the most important practices I give women is connecting with their five senses. And
Hmm.
so every day, can you be mindful of one pleasurable experience connected to your senses? Because you're already doing it, you're just not paying attention,
Yes.
right? And so
Yeah.
when you actually pay attention, that is when you get that beautiful biochemical rush in your body, the oxytocin, the serotonin, dopamine, all of those things, which are so, so beneficial. So they're already happening. So why not pay attention to them?
Yes, that's what I say about intuition. We all have it. We're
Hmm.
just not really paying attention to what we're receiving.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about your sacred metabolism. Can you tell me a little bit about what that is and how that helps women in midlife?
Yes, absolutely. So, at its core, metabolism is really how our bodies create and use energy. So, I think most people are familiar with the more conventional sense, which is about, you bring in food and then your body transforms that food into energy that your body can use. For me, I really that of course is a big part of what I address is that physical metabolism. But for me, I think that we have two kinds of metabolism. So if we put the sacred lens on that, metabolism is not only a biochemical process; it's actually the way that we transform life into vitality, into pleasure, into creative power. So our energetic metabolism also exists, right? We have
Hmm.
a whole way of being in the world that is around energy that has nothing to do with food, but it has to do with how we are taking in life. And so that may be more related to breath. It may be more related, well, it absolutely is related to pleasure. It is absolutely related to our creativity, all of these things. So, my lens of sacred metabolism, and I think it's so important for women, is that we address our energy systems from both the physical and the energetic. So, we can't have one without, we can't thrive if we simply just tap into one. And that was my own experience, in my
Yes.
life of really recognizing, particularly as I moved into midlife, that both were really, really important. I kind of vacillated between one and another through at various points in my life. And then I really came to the realization that tending to your entire sacred metabolism, to physical and energetic, is really the key to thriving.
Yeah. I love that explanation. Thank you. And so you have a freebie that women can find on your vibrancyreset.com. Can you tell us a little bit about what the vibrancy guide for women is?
Sure. Yes, so I intended this to be a really practical resource. It has doable, actionable, and effective steps for women who are in perimenopause and beyond, who just want to feel more energized, more balanced, and really great in their bodies right away. So I have 5 simple actions in there. It's at vibrancyreset.com, and pleasure is definitely included in there as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Carla, I want to thank you for joining us today and bringing this depth and honesty to this conversation. I think it's so needed in the world that we live in today. Women are navigating more than ever this journey, and we're talking about it. We're finally getting to the point where we can stand up for ourselves and say, this is what I'm going through. This is what I need in my life. And I need the people around me to support me through this process. I want to thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. I've loved our conversation, Tarianne.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day, everybody, and I will be back next week to join you on Sacred Wellness.